Very good. You ready, Madam Clerk? All right, we'll go ahead and call this working session of the East Peoria City Council to order. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Decker?
Here.
Hill?
Here.
Mingus?
Here.
Sutherland? Mayor Call?
Here.
All present except Commissioner Sutherland, Your Honor.
Thank you, ma'am. All right, today's working session is a 2045 Comprehensive Plan update. Just to remind everybody, no formal action will be taken by the City Council for discussion purposes only. And I'm going to turn the floor over to Ty Livingston. You can introduce our guest.
Will do. Thank you, Your Honor. So we're in the home stretch with our comprehensive planning effort. We had a meeting earlier today with our steering committee, planning commission, and ZBA. And so we're getting into some of the meat of the issue, looking at future land use planning and that sort of thing. And so I'm not going to take any more of their thunder. From PGAB, we have Teresa and Kristen here with us to give us an update on the process and next steps that are going to happen here to wrap things up.
Very good. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council. My name is Kristen Harden. I'm a senior project manager with PGAB, and I have Teresa Anderson here with me. She's also a project manager at PGAB. So go ahead.
So we had, just to disclose this, we had a little technical difficulty. We have a slideshow that they're presenting to us. And we don't have a clicker, so Ty is manually going to click through the slides.
I'll do my best.
So this evening, we're here to give you all kind of a general update on the comprehensive plan process, and we'll spend some time talking through the work that the steering committee, ZBA, and Plan Commission did this afternoon, which includes some future land use planning, and then we'll talk about the steps that come after this. All right, so just a quick update. Our project timeline is shown here. We are putting the final touches on phase 3, wrapping that up with making some revisions to the sub-area plans for Richland Farms, as well as the Four Corners District. And today was the official start of phase 4, which will round out the planning process. So today we spent a lot of time talking about future land use planning. This is also the phase where we'll get into the implementation strategy and then also writing the plan document. All right, so future land use planning. We spent some time this afternoon talking about this, starting with kind of a refresher, just reminding everyone that there is a difference between your future land use plan and your zoning code. A lot of people often get those mixed up. Your future land use plan is a part of the comp plan. It's a policy document and sort of guides and informs the decisions that you'll make about future development in your community. And then your zoning code is a tool that you use to implement your comp plan and your future land use map. So that's where the rules, the do's and the can'ts and all that come into play with your zoning code. All right, so one important factor to consider in future land use planning in Illinois is the 1.5 mile planning area. So the Illinois Municipal Code allows municipalities to plan for up to 1.5 miles beyond your corporate boundaries. A couple of caveats there is that obviously you can't plan for an area that's already incorporated in another municipality. And then in instances where your 1.5 mile buffer overlaps with a 1.5 mile buffer of a neighboring community, then those communities are required to enter into a boundary agreement when you're both considering annexing within the same area. So that's something that we'll be talking through for East Peoria, because you do have some neighbors where you have some overlap. So the map that you see here is East Peoria's boundary, and then the gray buffer around it is that 1.5 mile planning area. And these two sort of white hatched bubbles shows kind of a merger of the 1.5 mile planning areas of all of your neighboring communities. So Washington, Morton, Marquette Heights, Pekin, all of those areas. And then what happens outside of those two bubbles are areas where there is no overlap. So these parcels kind of highlighted here in red represent kind of what we've been talking about as, potentially low-hanging fruit. areas that you could pursue annexation for today, and you wouldn't have to enter into a boundary agreement with any municipality. So we're kind of looking at those areas as kind of a first priority for annexation. As we're thinking about development, especially for vacant land in the city and the 1.5 mile planning buffer, we like to look at land use suitability. So try to identify areas, generally large areas where development may be more or less suitable than other areas. And the way we do this is we look at several different factors and shape files and things like that in GIS. If anyone is a mapping nerd and into GIS, and we sort of give a weight to each of these layers based on feedback that we've heard from the community and our existing conditions work to understand, what's important for East Peoria. So some factors we've looked at here include school district boundaries, slope topography, so we've got a lot of hills and things here in East Peoria, flood risk, where vacant land is located, undermined areas, all sorts of things. And this is just kind of where we've started. You could look at a number of factors to kind of get where you want to go, just depending on what you're looking for. But the result of that is the map to the right on the screen, which shows in the darker blue areas, based on this list of factors, where development may be more suitable, particularly as it relates to undeveloped land. And then the lighter areas, just kind of on this spectrum, areas that may be less suitable for new development. And so you're seeing here a lot of those pockets of the darker blue are mostly within the city's boundaries, and then some areas to the north. But we understand that there are other priority areas around the city's boundary, particularly to the south. And the reason why you're seeing those areas be a little lighter is because we've kind of given some important consideration to school district boundaries. And we know that it's, important for the city, working alongside the local school districts to, we want to see growth in residential development in East Peoria proper first. But we have heard some input from the community that there may be families out there who have preferences for other school districts. And so here we kind of prioritize the East Peoria school districts. So that's why you're seeing those lighter shades outside of the city's boundaries. But that's something we'll talk a little bit more about here soon. So some of the future land use considerations we had the group thinking about today. We were working in small groups, had a lot of maps and markers and sticky notes and things out on the table for a fun afternoon. But one important consideration was for folks to think about how land uses are likely to change in different areas of the community, and how this group, of stakeholders thought that land use should change in some of these areas. So we wanted to think about residential density. So our existing neighborhoods, are there areas where maybe we'd like to see kind of a breakup in the homogeny of single family only residential uses? Or might there make sense to have some duplexes coming in as infill development in some existing places? Then also thinking about where new development might take place, whether that's residential, commercial, or industrial, in the city's limits or outside those limits. And then also, importantly, thinking about preservation and conservation. So preservation being, hey, we think this area or this particular type of land use works very well for our community. We want to make sure that this stays the same. And then as far as conservation goes, thinking about some of those environmental factors like flood risk and topography, where are those areas that we want to make sure, kind of are retained more or less for open space. And we also wanted to make sure that, we're thinking about a lot of those main corridors that run through the city. We've sort of referred to this as like downtown being the hub, and then you've got all these spokes running out from that center. We spent a lot of time talking about our two sub areas, Richland and the Four Corners district, and so we wanted to make sure everyone's also thinking about these other important commercial corridors and where reinvestment might need it and where there might be other opportunities for new development. And then we gave the group some instructions on, how to identify these areas of potential change in the future. Your current future land use map sort of reflects a lot of these categories here. So thinking about the intensity of use for residential development and kind of a low, medium, or high scale. Here in this case, we're recommending low density, medium density, and then mixed density as kind of a third future land use category. Mixed density residential or mixed residential, might be neighborhoods or subdivisions that could include a mix of housing types. You might go into a new subdivision where there's single family and duplexes and 3-unit townhomes or condominiums. So that's something that as we're doing work in other communities around Illinois and Missouri, that communities are trying to get creative and figure out how they build density that makes sense for their community. And so density doesn't always have to look like a huge apartment complex. It can, look very different community to community. And then we also posed some key questions to the group. And so this is, again, based off a lot of the feedback that we've heard throughout the planning process, but questions that will impact the future land use plan. One, as I mentioned, regarding school districts and future residential development opportunities. We've just heard that, from families and from the real estate community, there's a perception that other school districts have a higher preference than East Peoria School District. So when we think about where future residential development might take place, if we know that there's, some demand driven by this preference, then maybe there are opportunities outside of the city's current boundaries that fall within the boundaries of these other school districts where maybe it makes sense to try to attract some new residential development. So that was an important discussion we had this afternoon. And then we also wanted to think again about that 1.5 mile planning area. Who are your neighbors? Who are those folks that, some of you all are going to have to sit down with and start having some of the negotiations. One important community being Morton, where we know south of East Peoria's current boundary, Morton has, been kind of slowly growing west, and that kind of encroaches on an area that is a priority here. So that'll be, one community where some important conversations will need to be had in the future. Marquette Heights, North Pekin, Creve Coeur, Pekin, those areas have 1.5 mile planning areas that extend east, so then also encroaching on yours from the other side. Some of these communities may not have the same priorities, but because the municipal code requires you to have those boundary agreements, it's a process you have to go through. But, you might get where you want to get easier in some of those conversations than others.
If I could jump in real quick here. So the challenge here that's referenced in relationship to Morton is a previous administration, not the current one. And there may be some opportunity to have some conversations with the current administration. So the challenge here is reflective of a previous one, not currently.
Yeah, I'd just like to point out, I brought this up earlier in our meeting, just so everyone's aware. Mayor Kaufman and I have talked about this. It's been a few years past since our last conversation about it. But I think it would be in both communities' interest to come up with a boundary agreement. I brought up the current state law that needs to be refined with respect to commercial solar projects. Pretty much everyone's probably aware the Tazewell County Board just reconsidered the Morton Solar Project, which will infringe on areas that they had plans for future growth where they already installed infrastructure. So I think it would behoove all of the communities, quite honestly, to work together to come up with boundary agreements. I think it's in all of our best interests. So I'm pretty confident that we can do that, but to Kristen's point, those are conversations you don't want to just have in a plan. Those are conversations that need to be had to implement the plan, so thank you.
Quick question, Ty. So Groveland is not included in, is it a municipality? I know that they may not butt a mile and a half, but I know that they would be a mile and a half from our borders.
I don't know that they're incorporated.
I don't know either, I'm asking.
Yeah, so this would be with incorporated entities. They are? No, I don't believe that. Yeah, I didn't think so.
And I don't know why I think that, but I think that question has been posed before, and
I know they've got a sign, I think it says so many years they've been a community. I think when you go into town, I'd have to look at it. Because they would for sure also come into our mile and a half, or may even be in our mile and a half if they're not.
They would, yeah, they would be if they were.
Yeah.
A good example of one of these agreements is we have one with Washington that's existing. It's been renewed once, and it really looks at, you know, what makes sense for extending infrastructure, because, you know, every community has their limits to where you're going to have to add a substantial amount, whether it's on the sewer side or the water side or what have you. So we've had a really great relationship with Washington, and I think we can do the same thing with Morton, and then, you know, maybe look to the west too and see if there's opportunities there. But we'll certainly investigate the Groveland piece. But to my knowledge, they would not be one we need to talk to because they're not incorporated. But we'll confirm that.
A few other questions that we posed to the group was to, you know, think about notable residential land use changes, whether in the city or outside of the corporate boundaries. Again, thinking about existing neighborhoods that are, you know, already built out, thinking about, you know, the types of infrastructure improvements and things that might be needed to support an area, maybe where you want to see more mixed-use residential development occur. I think one place that one of the groups noted was down in the Richland Farms, you know, with some of the other development that's taking place down there, that might be an opportunity to kind of mix up that residential land use. Again, thinking about the major corridors, and then just generally thinking about potential opportunities or barriers that might come up generally as the city continues to think about future land use. And a lot of those barriers that came up were, you know, potential challenges dealing with other communities around boundary agreements, which is to be expected. All right, and then I'll hand it over to Teresa to share a little bit of what was heard this afternoon.
Yes, thank you. And thank you to the gentlemen here who were part of this process. We had 3 groups of about 3 or 4 people this morning working on each of these maps to kind of go over those questions and discuss with each other and kind of plan out what future growth might look like. So this first group looked at the growing south a lot and having a mix of residential development, and that's that yellow, and then the purple would be industrial development, and then to the north we're looking at primarily low density residential to close the gaps between Washington Street and 24, and then also just a smattering of you know, the green you can see near the river, and then green and yellow on the east side to look at that. That would be land for conservation and low density, where the yellow is. That's the low density single family residential. All right, next one. All right, so this next one, they were talking a lot about the school districts, and in our map with priorities, where we created, you know, kind of the you know, where are the best places to develop. We put a large weight on that school district, and they kind of said, what if we didn't, and we just wanted to do growth and residential growth, especially, you know, to have those tax dollars, even if they're not quite in the East Peoria School District, and just having that growth at all would be good. So that's their southern growth they're looking at. And they also really concentrated on refining that 1.5 mile planning area and negotiating boundary agreements, especially down south between those communities. All right, and then our last one looked at mixed residential developments, so more of infill, as well as some up to the north, looking at, and then a few to the south, and keeping close to those boundaries, which of course makes it better for extending utilities and all that kind of fun stuff. So just focusing on that land that's either infill or close to those boundaries. Yeah.
By the way, this was the worst map of the bunch. This was my homework.
Ty, I was not going to shame you. I wasn't
Too
gonna
much
call you
highlighter
out.
use.
Yeah, if you can't tell by the zoning designations that they're
Yeah.
written, if you can't see those.
Yeah, it's hard,
these are
it's hard to read, but I was in Ty's group today. I'd just like to point out one of the things that Kristen, as we were having our discussion, and we talk about priorities, and I think all three groups today really had a focus on more residential development, whether it's mixed, what's that look like, low density or medium density? How do you fill in these areas? Well, one of the points that Kristen brought up, the question that she posed was really, you look at it in three ways with priorities. There's a priority for senior living, there's a priority for young professionals, and there's a priority for families. And as you look at this map and you try to prioritize, what's your target for those areas? And I say that because with the school district boundaries, one of the questions I asked, and I don't know that any of us know, I think we have a hunch, those are established at the state level. So good luck getting those changed. And I brought up, for decades in this town anyway, there's been discussion about consolidation, the need to consolidate. No one's willing to give up their taxing body, if you will, for the betterment of the whole. So that's a challenge in itself. So you really have to look at this and incorporate in your plan and realize, even though when you go south, there's still a pocket that covers East Peoria schools, but when you look at our planning boundaries, the majority of what's south would not include our school districts. So you have to know that going in and make it part of your priorities, whatever your target is going to be. And just kind of throwing that out there. I thought it was very insightful.
Yeah, our group also did talk a little bit about commercial nodes, and so thinking about that southern border where we're along Muller Road. I think the Dollar General, for as much criticism as was levied for it, really was able to capture there was a lack of that type of service in that part of the community. That those residents were kind of at a watershed point of, do we go to Morton? Do we go to downtown East Peoria? And so I think that there's opportunities if you look along that Muller corridor, and maybe it's something as simple as a gas station, but some commercial development there to kind of help capture those residents that live there, give them an opportunity to have those services without having to go to Morton to get those. And there's other places in the community you can think of that. If you look at Route 24, there's some services there opposite ICC. Is there opportunity for more along that corridor there, whether it's down to Grange or what have you.
So I'd also like to point out part of that discussion today that I also thought was extremely beneficial with respect to the planning boundaries, including in there what you don't want to see in those areas. No different than I bring up, the cannabis when the state legalized it and the council took a look at it and we agreed to allow it with a limit on it. But we also only allow in specific areas those types of businesses. So I think it's also important to note if there's something that you don't want in these areas is just as important as what you're trying to target to include as part of that plan. So I'm just kind of throwing that out there as part of something to think about.
So when Ms. Harden earlier mentioned the codes and the plan are two separate things, but some things that come out of the comprehensive plan would lead to code changes.
Absolutely.
And having those things in the code can also help you when people are asking for rezonings or anything
Yes.
like that, that this is kind of the document you can point to and say, we as a community decided that this is what we want to see, and kind of use that as a backbone for your decisions.
Just a question follow-up, Ty. I think we look at a lot of it was residential growth is what was looked at. I think looking at future residential growth, one thing to look at would be our current residential growth. Correct me if I'm wrong, but meetings go by so fast. At a previous meeting, we talked about building permits and new construction building permits that the city sees. a majority of those were outside of East Peoria School District, where new homes are being built currently are not in the East Peoria School District. Is that it?
That's
Is that
correct.
accurate?
Yeah. New housing starts for the last maybe 15, 20 years have been largely in Washington School District.
Which is a small portion of our actual city corporate limits.
Right.
So I think that that's important to look at as we plan for future growth, is where is our current growth, and that is a trend that at least I have seen also.
Yeah, and that was, as we looked at that today, you look at developable property that would be ideal for new housing starts, and a lot of it lies in Washington and Morton school districts. There's some in East Peoria, but we have to be much more strategic about it and certainly, focused on it, because it is sometimes a little more difficult to build in those areas because it's already built up in a lot of cases. There's smaller parcels available.
Thank you.
Keep that crack just a hair because it's an open, thank you. Appreciate that. Yeah, and, one of the groups today talking about, want to touch on those major corridors too, because our group, we talked about the riverfront TIF and how that's going to enhance that corridor, just north of 74 on North Main Street. One of the groups touched on Meadow Avenue and some ideas that how do you incentivize redevelopment or improvements along the Meadow corridor. So they were kind of focused on that as part of their project. So, but a lot of good discussion there.
Mayor, to your point you made a few minutes ago, I think it's almost impossible, it seems like anyway, to get the education to allow like different school districts. The reason is across from Armstrong, that neighborhood across from Armstrong, there's a Brendan Court. They had friends that lived on Brendan Court. They would actually have to drive past Armstrong to take the kids to Robine. They tried to get it changed, but I understand it's tax dollars. If they agreed to allow them to change, then tax dollars. I didn't want to, go back to that necessarily, but I did want to comment. I think it's impossible to get those things to change. We just have to live with what's there.
Well, East Peoria is unique. We're just divided up, whether it's school districts, our representation in Springfield, federally, quite honestly, we got 5 fingers going and we're spread out. So we're unique in that sense. And that's why I feel strongly that we need to bring forward a really good comprehensive plan. But more importantly, don't just have it because you want a plan. These are actual goals in trying to move our community forward. So we want to make sure it's stuff that as a community, that's what we want to see East Peoria be in the next 20 years. So, anyway, anything else?
I believe there's more. Yeah.
And so then coming next, once we kind of get through the bulk of the future land use planning and to the point where we can present a draft future land use map to the city, we'll also be working on the implementation strategy. So we refer to this as the OKRs, or the objectives and key results. So this strategy will include like broad themes like housing, transportation, the 2 sub areas, and then within each of those themes, you'll have objectives, which represent the what is it that we want to do related to housing or transportation, and then your key results will represent the how. So what are those strategies and action items that help you to achieve the what's? So that's essentially the framework of the implementation strategy. And right now, we've started to work on some of these, mostly the sub areas, since those are pretty much done. Some of those themes include the 2 sub areas, housing, transportation. Right now, business development and growth are kind of lumped up together, but those might get broken out. And over the next few weeks, as we continue to work with staff and the steering committee, we might pull out some other broader themes just to help frame out the OKRs a little bit better. And so what's next? This afternoon, We also had a pop-up open house type of event at the Richland Community Center. So since we are kind of wrapping up the sub-area planning, we wanted to make sure that we gave the residents down there in Richland another opportunity to make sure that we've heard them accurately as far as, key issues, concerns, and opportunities go, and give them an opportunity to preview some of the initial strategies that, we're pairing with those issues and opportunities, and just to, really make sure that we're doing a good job of reaching out to the folks down there in that neighborhood. So we still have a team that's down there at the community center wrapping things up for that. After today, we'll have at least one additional steering committee meeting before we get to the last open house. It'll probably end up being 2 steering committee meetings, one where we can really just focus on the draft future land use map, and then a second one to focus on the draft implementation strategy, because those 2 pieces will be the focus of the final open house.
Very good.
Yep. And from there, we'll be off writing the plan.
Very good. Any additional questions or comments from the commissioners? No? Well, listen, anything else you guys would like to add? Kristen, Teresa, thank you. Appreciate it today. I thought it was really, I really got a lot out of it. I thought it was great. We had some great groups, a lot of good information shared, and look forward to continuing to work with you both, and safe travels.
Yep, awesome. Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, we have no one from the public to comment, so no further comments. I'd seek a motion to adjourn the working session.
So moved.
May I have a second?
Second?
All right, thank you. Any discussion? Hearing none, roll call.
Commissioner Decker?
Aye.
Hill? Aye. Mingus?
Aye.
Sutherland?
Late aye.
Mayor Call?
Aye.
All those voting aye, Your Honor.
Very good. We are adjourned, and we'll convene the regular meeting promptly at 6 p.m.